everybody, and thank you for joining me today. It's Allan Laboucan from the Rocks and Stocks news site, and we've got another in our interviews with executives of junior mine, or in this case, a mining company that I think is on a tremendous growth curve. Downey runs i-80 Gold, and I gotta say, congratulations, you just announced your first 4 holes from Ruby Hill. And look at these numbers, 71 grams of 71 meters of 7 grams, 9 meters, 15.8, 9 grams over 18 meters, 9 grams over 24 meters, 7.1 grams over 78 meters in your first 5 holes on that Ruby Deeps target. You got to be walking on air.
That's a good way to put it. I think it's a great way to start. The historic work that was done here on this Ruby Deeps deposit at Ruby Hill, most of the drilling was done by Homestakes. That was, 2-3 decades ago, and so it's been known that there's high-grade mineralization at depth below and to the north, and looks like it's going to go to the south of the Ruby Hill pit. But back when it was drilled by Homestake, they were more interested, and Barrick drilled a few holes after that when they took over Homestake. But they were, at the time, 15, 20 years ago, they were more focused on trying to find oxide mineralization at surface. So a lot of these high-grade intercepts around the property had limited follow-up, and in some cases, they're single holes on the property with 0 follow-up with very high-grade mineralization. So this is just the first target. We've been drilling the 426 zone here in 2022, which is part of Ruby Deeps. And in our Investor Day presentation yesterday, we had a picture of a big zone of altered core that we're quite confident is going to carry some very strong grades. We're stepping out now both north and south. That 76-meter intercept you referenced was one of the northernmost holes into the deposit to date. So we're going to continue stepping out north, and we're actually seeing that these sort of intercepts, like the 426 zone, intersects the Holly Fault at a sort of a northeast trending structure, and we think it could really consolidate high grade and really wide mineralization. And if we can find a number of these northeast striking faults along the structure, we could have a number of Ruby Deeps along the trend. And it's a pretty amazing property. The drill programs we have going at Granite Creek and Ruby Hill, I think I told you before we started this interview, I've been doing pretty concentrated exploration across Mexico, Canada, US for about 30 years now. But these 2 properties have really genuinely been the 2 top projects in terms of continuity of mineralization I've ever seen.
Well, and that's something I'm glad you brought up, because continuity is king in this business. I hear a lot about grade being king, but continuity is king and margin is queen to me. And that's what, where you find these big mines. And when I listened to your presentation at the Investor Day, I was really impressed with the fact that this is a stratigraphic horizon that you've now been able to drill along. So not only do you have continuity along strike, but you've got thick intersections of continuity there as well. Again, this is sort of what mining companies dream about.
Yeah, it's like that. Some of these intercepts, the 70-meter intercepts that we had in the 2 of the 4 holes that had the highlight results that we put out yesterday, if you put in, just to put in a context, you could think about it's a flat-lying zone, but with a 70-meter intercept, that'd be the equivalent of a 20-25-story building high. So those are, if you think about that, and those are the size of stopes, often you see high-grade mineralization over, 1 to 3 meters. And this is just big continuous zones of mineralization, huge alteration package, and really just a few focused areas have been drilled below this pit historically. We're stepping out to the north, to the south, compiling old data, finding all kinds of interesting targets. And And I mentioned in our investor day that just last week, our head geo, Tyler, who's been drilling these holes, and we've got a lot to come because we're well into the 22 program. We released the results from 21. Is almost everywhere we drill on this property, we hit pretty significant thickness of Carlin type alteration. And on a scale that he made the quote last week, and I'm quoting Tyler, that we could be on to a Carlin type alteration system comparable to size of Cortez. And as you know, Cortez is the second biggest mine in Nevada right now, produces huge number of ounces. The Gold Rush discovery is a brand new deposit they're developing there. They keep finding new deposits, and Ruby Hill looks just like a project that could give and give and give for years. And
that being in it, having spent some time in exploration myself, when you talk about alteration packages of that size, I kind of want to bring it down for the average investor out there. This is where you have the chemicals altering the rock. And, when you have such a big alteration package, it's suggestive of a big mineralizing system.
Yeah, it's on a scale that we haven't seen. We've had a lot of success. We had a different interpretation of the Cove deposit on the McCoy Cove property that we turned into a deposit now sitting close to or just over 1.7 million ounces at 11 grams in all categories. There's pretty intensive alteration there as well as you get away from the deposit, but just not nearly on the scale of what we're seeing especially at Ruby Hill. And then Granite Creek, obviously we made the South Pacific Zone discovery we're delineating. It's looking like it's going to be at least 10 grams per ton. But those both
with continuity,
but both Cove and McCoy are, we'd expect true widths of the different zones being sort of 2 to maybe 10, 15 meters in places. Whereas what we're drilling here at Ruby Hill looks like if you've got a 5-meter stope, that would just be a little part of it. These the true widths on these 4 holes were all over 15 meters and up to over 70 meters. So when you're looking at that type of size of intercepts, the ability to grow a resource very quickly, as you know, is paramount. And we're not going to put 20 drills on here and just drill for news. We're permitting. We expect to be driving the decline in the 4th quarter. So we have to be cognizant of our balance sheet. But given what we're seeing, we're not stopping here. We think we've got an opportunity to have a multi-million, potentially a deposit on the tens of millions of ounces that we could drill at this project. And as you know, I'm a real fan of exploration. I just want to keep going, and maybe we have to increase our budget a bit.
The other thing I want to tell our audience about is I've known you for a long time, and you don't throw those kind of comments out loosely. I hear a lot of loose comments about Carlin trend targets and the next Carlin trend deposits, and coming from a lot of people. But I take it with a much more importance when you're saying it. And let's face it, the geology is telling you that you've got this big alteration. And now you're putting it in the truth machine with your drilling. And this is just one part of the Ruby Hill story.
Yeah, Ruby Hill also has a base metal deposit below the pit. We call it Blackjack. We expect to drill a few holes at that target here later this year. We are upgrading that deposit to resource status, not yet in resource. It appears to be a very high grade, probably plus 10% zinc with very good gold, silver, lead, and a little bit of copper credits. The story at Ruby Hill, I don't think is just going to be gold. It's going to be a big gold and base metal system. And as you often see, even in our key and Canadian camps, is if there's a big base metal camp where there's lots of base metal mines, ultimately somewhere around there's a big gold mine. And here it's a bit different. Everybody kind of in this area of Nevada, Carlin, Battle Mountain trends, more typically search for high-grade gold mineralization. But if there's big gold deposits around, say even like Red Lake, you'd think that there's going to be a big base metal deposit somewhere. So I think that Ruby Hill may be that big base metal deposit for the Carlin Battle Mountain trend, so to speak, other than the Phoenix Porphyry area that Nevada Gold Mines has.
Well, and when we were getting ready to do the show, you told me about some historical work that not only did it have base metals of zinc and lead, but it also had some tremendous silver. So, it can't be lost on people that Nevada is called the silver state for a reason. It started out as a silver camp, and in the last 50 years has been a tremendous gold camp, but who knows, maybe there's another big silver mine out there with some base metal credits.
Yeah, there's actually on the property Homestake, again, 20, 30 years ago, a single hole drilled in one area that we expect to follow up that had tremendous zinc, lead, silver, bit of gold, and a bit of copper credits. And just to make us a bit more excited about is immediately south of our project is a company called Paycore, and we're an investor, and I think you interviewed Paycore. Our company's invested in them, and they're drilling off a high-grade polymetallic system, so zinc with good gold credits at depth. But near surface, the first mine in the Ruby Hill, or the main mine in the Ruby Hill district, is actually on the FAD property. And that historic Ruby Hill mine, which was up on the hill, produced, I believe, about 1.6 million ounces of gold from 1.8 million tons of rock. So extremely high grade. Also had base metals around, and that's the open pit target they're drilling. So it shows you that there are these super high grade, large polymetallic projects. So FAD that they're drilling is pretty exciting. Where we're drilling, eventually going to be drilling at Blackjack, looks to be another one of those type of systems. And as I mentioned, we've identified a single Homestake hole on the property that was never followed up with spectacular grades of silver, with very high grade gold and not gold, zinc, lead, and about a gram gold over pretty substantial widths
and some copper in there too that you can't sneeze at. Yeah,
I think it was probably, we haven't really looked at it that closely for copper, but it's definitely well over 1% copper with that, over a nice 10-meter intercept that is just sitting there unfollowed up. And because Homestake was looking more for, and then Barrick subsequent to that, more for oxide open pits, it was just I guess they just assumed it wasn't good enough to follow up. And we're pretty happy that they didn't follow it up, because it may end up being another pretty major system here. So it's just a property that is, as we've compiled the data, is pretty remarkable, and it'll be a fun year. That's in terms of exploration.
Before we get off these Ruby Hill deep results, I do want to talk about all the various targets you have at Ruby Hill, but I just can't stop looking at those numbers you reported, Ewan. That's just, to me, it's incredible. I watched lots of projects to get a sheet like that, a horizon like that, the big alteration. I mean, that's the potential for a company maker. But then you also have a resource there of 5 million ounces, and you've got all these other targets. I'm flabbergasted. I'm almost speechless, and that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, we have I'd say 6 kind of more exploration targets outside of Ruby Deeps and 426 on the property. We'll be drilling all of them this year. We've already drilled a couple of those targets and visually seeing what we'd like to see in terms of alteration systems, and waiting for the assays on that. But we're hoping by year end, we're talking about drilling off 5 or 6 deposits on the property, not just the Ruby Deeps / 426 deposit.
And those alone, Ruby Deeps, could be a company maker. I'm starting to think that this whole Ruby Hills project could be a company maker. And I want to invite people to go to your website, because if they look at your last news release, you have the link to that conference call you guys did. And you guys showed a lot of really good maps there that can sort of help people to wrap their head around how big Ruby Hills is. So I invite the viewers to also go to i-80's website and check out that conference call, because it's part of why I'm speechless about almost speechless about what you've already reported in just your first 4 attempts at that Ruby Deeps target.
Yeah, and we'll continue drilling out Ruby Deeps for hopefully the balance of this year, partially to infill with some of the historic data so that we have sufficient drill spacing to be building we're looking to move into sort of pre-fees type work at Ruby Hill. So we have to start tightening up the drilling at some point. The 426 zone is more looking like an oxide deposit higher up in the system that we are drilling off this year to try to get fill up that drill density to get it to the point where we're actually designing stopes around that, because later this year we expect to drive the decline. As we mentioned at the Investor Day, probably November, December of this year, and early in 23, we're going to be right beside 426. So drilling that 426 out there is going to be quite important. And a couple of the other targets we call D2. So Ruby Deeps we call R2, and then we've got D2, and that's the Deeps 2 target. We'll be doing some drilling there. There's a water well hole in between that we're just following up. They drilled a dewatering well, hit gold in that. So we're following that up. And if those two pan out, they're right at the ramp. So we'll likely have to increase our budget, is my view, assuming we get grade in those targets, just so when we get the decline in, we know the areas we should be drilling from underground to prepare for mining. And I'd like to hope by the end of next year, we'll start to be mining on ore on this property. So it's,
as you were explaining all that, it reminded me of the Lassonde curve. And there's 2 big exciting parts of the Lassonde curve: exploration success, then the lull for putting in permitting and getting it into production, then production. You have narrowed that window in between those 2 exciting places. I mean, these are company making results for an exploration company, but then you won't have to go through that long development discount window, and you'll be kind of putting those 2 curves really close together on more than one project.
Yeah, that's what we think. The South Pacific zone we're drilling off at Granite Creek is right beside the OG zone, and we're just starting mining the OG zone at Granite Creek. So we're just starting our first mining from that project. We'll be starting to make our stockpile, and we'll be delivering, because we have that interim processing agreement with Nevada Gold Mines. So we'll be delivering ore to them in the second half of this year. And at the same time, we're drilling off this very exciting, right beside it, South Pacific zone. And if all goes well, we should be developing towards and drilling from underground the South Pacific zone in 23. Hopefully bring that into the mine plan by mid or the 3rd quarter of next year. And so those 2, it's development and, as you said, exploration together. And Ruby Deeps, we're just getting prepared. We finished mining the open pit. Now we're looking to drive the decline on that pit for the high grade underground. And by mid next year, we should be in a good position to start looking at some of the zones for actual mining. And at the same time, we may be drilling out several other targets on the property. So trying to put those 2 curves together as being kind of the strategy we have with i-80.
And what really excites me about Granite Creek is you've got that zone where there was the historical production. Right beside that, you've got the OG, so that's easy access. Then you've got the South Pacific zone, and it looks like everything's connected, but when you get to that South Pacific zone, you start putting the dots together of the horizon where you've got down to that really high grade, and arm waving is not not a hard thing there. You start looking at 3 or 4 times the strike length of what's known up above it.
Yeah, we've already demonstrated that in the upper workings where ATNA was, the strike length of the various zones is about 200 meters. And down where the South Pacific zone is, from what we've delineated so far, is at least 600. So we've tripled the sort of strike length of the system at depth, and it still remains open to the north. So,
and you're getting higher kicks of high grade there.
Yeah, and we're now stepping out at depth. So we're just continuing to take it deeper. And at depth, it's not really deep. We're not even close to the point where we're thinking about sinking a shaft. So it's all going to be ramp access, and it's looking pretty phenomenal. Like I said, it's 2 drill programs that you kind of hope for in your career. It's hard to believe we're doing 2 of them at once.
On for one company. You've been really kind with your time here, Ewan, and also with sponsoring my website so I can do these interviews and get the word out there. Another reason I want to invite the viewers to go to that conference call you guys did is that you did a really good job of explaining how you work the pipeline into that centralized plant, and how it will be what looks like make you move into what your big goal is. And this is a huge goal that companies that reach these kind of goals have multi-billion-dollar valuations, which is you guys want to be the 2nd largest producer of gold in Nevada. And that was a great explanation of how you're going to get there. So I think it's important, but maybe touch on that a little before we close off here, Ewan.
Yeah, well, right now we're just starting to mine the first stopes at Granite Creek. That should ramp up into the end of this year and continue to ramp up as we put in more development throughout 2023. So it's one of the 3 projects. So we acquired the Lone Tree processing facility from Nevada Gold Mines, and it's a site, an autoclave processing facility. It has about 2,800 tons a day capacity. So we expect to do about 1,000 tons a day from Granite Creek. So it doesn't fill that facility. It's a bit too big for the one deposit. But now, earlier this year, we've started the decline at Cove. By the 3rd quarter of this year, we expect to start the underground drill program, complete a feasibility, and start ramping that up into development. And that'll go to the Lone Tree processing facility, just like Granite Creek will. And Ruby Deeps that we're drilling out now and expect to be driving the decline into the underground deposit later this year is also going to the same site. And that Matt Gilley in the presentation, I think, did a good job of explaining that. He said because he used to be the executive GM of Cortez, and Cortez is the 2nd biggest mine. I think Cortez, between open pit and underground, produces over 1 million ounces a year on its own. And so he was the guy who ran that project, and a very successful project for Barrick in Nevada. And as he said in this presentation, Cortez, they had 3 declines, just like we're doing, and they trucked the ore from Cortez all the way up to the Carlin, the Carlin roasters, or the ones at Gold Strike. And so that's exactly what we're doing, is 3 declines feeding one facility, except up in the Carlin system, they're not just doing Cortez, they're also processing ore from all the Carlin Trend mines at that facility. So it's a bigger scale project, but it's almost identical to what he did at Cortez, just on a smaller scale. So he was really trying to explain. Some people say, oh, you got a lot on the go. And he said, well, this is less on the go than I had at Cortez. So, it may seem like a big endeavor, but I don't think he tries to make it too simple. We don't think it's going to be easy, but it's not too difficult to imagine how this should work out quite well for our company, especially given the talent that we've been able to attract to our team.
Right. So you put out a checklist earlier this year of sort of your path to that 2nd largest producer. And I think the number is something about 400,000 ounces of annual production. I got to think that what you're seeing at Ruby Deeps has you believing, or even at Granite Creek and Ruby Deeps, has you believing that you'll be able to surpass that goal.
Yeah, our company presentation, we typically, if you read through the presentation, we're mainly targeting plus 250,000 is what we state.
Okay.
But we do have that goal that we also state this would be the second biggest producer. But the plus 250,000 ounces, getting our autoclave up and running, all those deposits working efficiently should get us quite easily to our initial target at 250. But that's our 3-year plan. So in addition to our 3-year plan, we have a 5-year plan. The 5-year plan includes an open pit at Granite Creek, which will have its own processing site at the property. So we'll have a heap leach facility on that property that will get us up, that we expect will get us up to becoming the second biggest producer in the state. And also in the 5-year plan, we're looking to bring in the Blackjack deposit. So it's the base metal polymetallic at Ruby Hill. So we feel quite comfortable that we're with just those projects, and the Blackjack will be built from the same ramp that Ruby Deeps is. So it doesn't involve putting in a whole bunch of new infrastructure for that one to happen. We just have to retrofit the existing mill to do flotation from, it's a CIL plant, make it a flotation tank. So not a big expected capital item to convert that over to do base metal concentrates. So it's just getting that plan. We have a 5-year plan, and then internally we're talking about our 10-year plan. How do we continue to grow? And that's where Mineral Point comes in. That's the biggest deposit we have in our portfolio. It's also at Ruby Hill. It's about a 5 million ounce open pit, but it's our third phase of growth, so to speak. So I currently envision our production within the next 10 years to be definitely a fairly large, mid-tier company just on the projects we have today. So we don't have to go make an acquisition, buy a new asset, or try to take over another company. We've got in all categories about 14.6 million ounces of gold already and growing. So organically, we feel pretty comfortable that we can build a very significant company in one of the friendliest jurisdictions you'll find anywhere in the world for mine development.
And that's a big point as well, that safe jurisdiction and infrastructure rich. You got power, you got roads, you got water, you got everything that ticks off the boxes to make you a big mining company.
Yep.
Well,
you've
pretty
been
happy
awesome.
to be awesome. Sorry, go ahead.
We're pretty happy to be in the position we're in, and we also announced on Monday that we acquired Baker Hughes project, a barite. It's actually a barite mining property with a mill and all kinds of infrastructure. We acquired that mainly for the water rights. In Nevada, it's pretty critical that you have sufficient water rights to be able to develop mines, given the water situation. It's a lot more difficult to create new water rights. So it's really the way to getting your water rights to go deeper in Nevada is really through acquisition. And this is a very strategic acquisition. Not only did we get the water rights that we believe will be sufficient for us to mine long-term the Cove deposit, but also the infrastructure that we got rail heading right on the central rail that goes through northern Nevada. And when I talk about why that could be strategically important to us in the future is, as I said, we want to develop Blackjack and make a concentrate. That concentrate can't go through our autoclave or we can make a concentrate, but then it's going to go to a smelter. So having that rail heading will allow us to truck it to there, put in a rail car, and then go anywhere it needs to go to get processed. So it had a pretty strategic additional value to us that you can't really put a number on. And so we're definitely ticking all those boxes in our checklist. I think last I checked, everything is green on our checklist. We have a weekly update on it. Just one thing's yellow. So we're tracking very well exactly how we said we do this year. we've made the acquisitions, or we're making the acquisitions, like the water rights that we put in there were very important for us to meet our goals in the future. And yeah, I think we're doing what we say, and that's when it comes to a mining company, that's pretty important.
Absolutely. And before I was getting ready to do the show, and I was thinking to myself, you know, how do you prioritize these targets? You got McCoy Cove, then Granite Creek's coming along, and now it looks like Ruby Hills may jump over everything, and those other two could be, you know, very significant projects on their own. You got to be pretty excited about how this is all unfolding, Ewan.
Yeah, well, we're not really, when we go underground here at Cove, the goal of that program is just to define what we have for production. And that right now, we expect that to be a 10-year mine life. So extending that beyond that, it is open for expansion, isn't a priority. So I don't think you'll look at us do a McCoy Cove right now is really just get it into development. So there won't be any exploration around the property. We've got a very large property package that continues to have significant upside, but that won't be a real high target just because it's the mineralization that we know is all refractory. And so it's going to need to go do a roaster and autoclave. So we're quite secure on what we're doing there. Granite Creek, same thing, other than permitting the open pit. The underground, once we feel we're pretty well done with a 10-year mine life, probably see the exploration slow down there. But Ruby Hill's really the one that we have been really surprised about as we continue to compile, as we continue to drill these lone holes, and you see so much mineralization. We don't want, you know, I think it's one of those properties where you don't want to make your plans too small because the deposit might be that big. And so I think you're probably right now, we've been stating we've got a 20,000 meter drill program, and I wouldn't be surprised if we increase that by 50% like we did Granite Creek, just to keep the foot on the throttle, so to speak, and maybe even double it based on what we see in the next targets, because there we have a heap leach pad, an operating heap leach pad. We're producing gold off it today. We've got a CIL plant there, so if there is oxide ore, we could process it right on site. It doesn't need to be trucked to our autoclave facility. So our ability to grow production out of Ruby Hill is really where we're getting very excited, because if we start that CIL plant, never mind Blackjack, we're going to increase production from our current vision. And so if we have those opportunities, we need to make sure we maximize those sooner than later. Now that we're probably 6-8 months away from driving the underground decline, I think we need to better understand the various opportunities, so that when we put that decline in, we're putting it in the right place, not only for Ruby Deeps, but maybe we need it for other parts of the property. So maybe as it comes out of the pit, instead of going straight down, it maybe goes a different direction initially, so that's better set up for multiple mining areas. And so it's pretty critical to make sure we do the right job there in terms of knowing what we have in some capacity, greater capacity, prior to driving the underground decline.
Well, you know, Ewan, as you're explaining all this, it reminds me of what I've mentioned before, that I see this following a similar path to a young Barrick. And, you know, every time you put the truth machine down there, it comes up with more confidence that that's potentially a reality. You know, and again, congratulations, and keep your foot to the pedal to the metal there, you. And I think you guys are on a tremendous growth curve.
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate, I know that you follow our story quite closely, and appreciate that. And the words comparing us to Barrick, that's a nice kudos to what we're doing. And no, it's great to be on your show again and be able to highlight what we're doing. Where you can probably tell by my reaction, I'm pretty excited about what we've done. I'm gonna keep buying my own stock. I know that.
I don't get goosebumps very often these days in this business, Ewan, but I'm getting them with what you guys are doing. So keep at it. And I'm going to close things off and we'll have a little chat at the end if that's okay.
Yeah, fine.
So there you go, folks. I'm pounding the table hard on i-80 gold because I do see that path that was similar. I mean, Barrick's a household name now, but even if they're only partially successful at that, it would make them into a multi-billion-dollar company. And currently they're trading at well under $1 billion valuation. And every time I see more results out of these projects, I just get more and more confidence and that's going to happen. And this Ruby Deeps, I wasn't expecting to see such thick intersections of high grade. And then when you look at the plan or the map, the cross section, it's a big horizon, and they're talking about lots of alteration and a big mineralizing system that is comparable to some of the world-class, literally world-class mines in Nevada. So, you know, do your homework, because this is the time to do your homework when you can buy things at a bargain. And I think i-80 is a tremendous bargain that has it's one thing to find a bargain in this business. It's another thing to see the catalysts that can drive that to a much higher valuation. And they've got catalysts, you know, in spades. It's not often I find myself speechless or almost speechless about what I'm seeing in a project, and that's what I'm seeing with i-80. So do yourself a favor and do your homework, speak with your financial advisors, go check out that corporate presentation, because you start to see all of these things at Ruby Hills and Granite Creek, how they all come together, and then how that comes together into a centralized plant that they also own. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.